Hi, I'm Nancy DiTomaso from Rutgers Business School, Newark and New Brunswick, and it's great to be here. This conference is an anecdote to some of the issues I'd like to raise with you, and it also is very different than most of the conversations that we have when we talk about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think that we need to recognize that. I'm going to show my age, and I have a sense that across the audience, there will be some people who don't actually remember any of these events. So I wanted to remind us that almost to the day, this is the 30-year anniversary of what was called the Los Angeles riots that occurred because Rodney King was beaten nearly to death by 4 white police officers, and then they were acquitted or not found guilty for that. One of the things that made it significant, of course, was because it was one of the first such events that was recorded on video. And that's one of the things that made it easier to respond. So after this near-death beating by the police in Los Angeles, it sparked a riot, some called it, which 63 people were killed and 2,000 were injured. And Rodney King famously asked, after recovering from his injuries, "Can't we all just get along?" That event, of course, which was a very unfortunate incident, had to do with police brutality, mistreatment of an unarmed black man. But of course, the experience of Rodney King was 25 years after the civil rights movement and after the riots that took place in 63, 64, up through about 68, that also many times were sparked by police misconduct and mistreatment of black men and women across the country. Some people called those rebellions, but most of them were sparked by police brutality toward unarmed black men and women. And now 30 years later, of course, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we have the killing by police of another unarmed black man in broad daylight, in the streets, on videotape, when George Floyd was executed. And again, we saw massive protests across the country, even around the world, and thought of that somehow as a seminal event that was going to change everything. And now we are a year or two after, and already the memory of it is beginning to fade, and we're seeing very different responses. So between those two events of Rodney King saying, "Can't we all just get along?" and George Floyd sparking what we thought of as a social justice movement, we've seen inequality in wealth and income has grown. Political polarization has become more pronounced. There are global crises with constant threats, and in this environment, both companies and countries are facing the challenges of how people can get along with each other, especially as populations have become more diverse in their composition, with migrations of people all over the world from different races, ethnicities, religions on a grand scale. And then in the context of this, we see the seeds of a new political movement, but it's in the context now of a global pandemic, a challenging economy, global conflicts that threaten the future, even more so now than before, and a political environment that is trying to make sure that these kind of events do not lead to any substantive and major changes. This is not just circumstantial, this is a political struggle, and it is a very determined one to try to undermine the kinds of forces that would make it possible for us to raise the kinds of issues that we have been talking about all day today and tomorrow. You know, as many of you know, across the country, not only is it now illegal in some states to talk about any of these issues K to 12, it's increasingly the case in some states that you can't even talk about this at the college level without some kind of threat of punishment. So in the context of these kinds of things, where democracy is being undermined, we have right-wing authoritarian governments arising, And the intent in many of these efforts essentially is to use the way that we categorize each other and try to understand those differences as ways to secure political reactions that will intensify the conflict. We can think about what normally is reflected in the research literature, reflected in the corporate world, in terms of what they talk about as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And from my mind, there has been far too much attention to things like individual prejudice, bias, thinking somehow that the problem is that some people are racist or sexist or homophobic, and that the way to address these issues is somehow to focus on the bias against those people as opposed to the bias for white men who are the ones that are in charge and in power. So I think we need a much broader vision. The political environment we're in is a contested terrain. It's a power struggle. And we need to keep in mind that change does happen, that it is possible to be transformative, but it is not something that is either guaranteed or that is fully understood. We sometimes forget that what we think of as the secure institutions of today disappear. People in power don't necessarily know what they're doing, and they are afraid of the mobilization of people against the kinds of injustice and inequality, and part of our responsibility is to make sure that we address those kinds of issues.